Hey everybody, it's Alycia with another episode of Tears at the Table, Younger Edition. This week we have Kayla James. She actually happens to be my cousin, and she also is a wife, mother, business owner, student, and many other things. Something unique about her, too, I want to highlight is she is a musician. She has an Instagram account called Darlin Hillbilly. So she likes to embrace her Appalachian roots. For those who don't know, I am originally from Kentucky, as is she. And Kayla, what else would you like to tell everybody about yourself?
That I'm glad that you claim me as family, that you're not scared of that.
I feel like I do have to insert there this backstory of we've only been cousins for a couple of years now because our grandparents eloped. What else you got to say about yourself you want people to know?
And well, I lived in Kentucky my whole life, so that's pretty much all I know. And the only other places I've ever been is actually very Kentucky-like as well, so Georgia and Tennessee. I've never stepped foot in a big metropolitan area, you'd say. So this is all I know.
I actually would love to have you elaborate on that. What is Kentucky like for people who don't know about Kentucky and where you're from?
It's very old school. And you'll see that a lot. If you got to know me, you would see how old school I am. I don't want to say set in their ways. There's a lot of people that are. It's just, it moves slower. I think that's a great way to say it. I was listening to my parents and grandparents talk and tell stories that, oh, we didn't have a phone for years. We had to go to Uncle Junior's house, and he was the only phone in the family and around this area that we could go to. Or I didn't have a TV in high school. Dad, you'll hear him say he didn't have a TV. So it's very slow progress here. Actually, something kind of funny, being from Waynesburg, there is no stoplight. And just recently, they took out the caution light they had. When I noticed that coming through town earlier, I asked Mom, I said, have we been downgraded? Like, I don't know what is below Waynesburg. Like now there is almost nothing to tell you you are in Waynesburg. That was always what you told people to look for, the caution light. And now there's no caution light. So that's very much what it feels like to be in rural America.
I want to elaborate some too because I don't get to talk that much about this part of my life. People know a lot about me growing up in the inner city, predominantly black communities, and they don't always hear as much about Kentucky, which is a place I have visited all my life and am living, and it's my second time living here, which a lot of people don't realize that. But what you were saying about slower pace of life, I remember telling people being like, 19 or 20, and I would go to the waterfall in my grandma's backyard and stand in it in order to get any bars for cell service. And that's like the only place you could get cell service. She just got Wi-Fi in the last couple years because it was
Oh,
not available where she was at.
yeah. That's like certain, you could only get one Wi-Fi provider there for the longest time, at my parents' house. And they're just now starting to come through with other companies and
And
very slow.
And to put that into perspective too, it's like we've had a lot of tornadoes and stuff, and there's like two different electric companies, I think it is. And so it's been
Pretty
like,
much.
how fast are you going to get electricity again? And it can be a couple days.
That's something else you could say about living in this part of the country. Family
Yeah.
usually is very close, especially the older generation. So I grew up around a lot of older people. Parents are older, grandparents. You pick up on that. You pick up on the older ways. And again, it goes that old world living.
Living with Peppa you were referencing, who's been my grandpa for 3 years now. And I live with him actually, and so I can attest to your stories too, like you were talking about. But I was asking him something about video games the other day, and he said all we had was a pile of dirt when I was little. That's all we had to play with. And it's that hardworking mentality too, though. Like you're talking about family, there's coming from different places now, there's a very hard work ethic here. And he's talked about like clearing the pines on his property, building an underground house. He's still at 85, like fixing
I
cars.
was about to say, maybe we should mention he's 85 years old and he still acts like he has to do something every day.
Yep. He just mowed an acre and a half of land yesterday. So, in addition to playing with our electrical wiring, and it's just like that's the way things are, and that's the way they've always been. And like you said, you talked about downgraded. I've been telling people we had the caution light, so now I'm downgrading to no. If you want to find us, look for Speedy Tacos. That's the only thing I can tell you now.
Yes, because you can't say look for the dollar store because we've got about five of them.
Yes, we only got one Speedy Tacos. And to put that in perspective, it's in a shed. But focusing more on what Tirza is very passionate about is like your faith, is how is growing up in rural America in Kentucky in the mountains influenced your faith personally?
Really, I think the quiet and the slowness of living in Appalachia allows you to, I don't want to say have more time with God because you can have time with God anywhere you want, but it feels like you just walk out the back door and it feels like you can stare him in the face.
Yeah.
You can see everything. You see his art, you see his signature everywhere you look. And I love that because it is just that reminder. I mean, when I imagine the city, I imagine skyscrapers. And my granny, she'd come back from Chicago. She'd go with her son for a little while and bring back a bunch of pictures, and we'd look through them, and I'm just like, where's the green? Where's the green? It's all gray and gloomy to me. Interesting, but when I step outside my back door and see all this beautiful, like fresh trees and I smell it, it's just all my senses are not overwhelmed. They're being blessed by God's beauty.
I agree with that. Since I've been here, I think I've experienced almost all the biblical plagues at this point. We're now in the cicada season.
Yeah.
And it has been what has inspired me in the midst of tornadoes that have now made national news. And that was right down the road from us. And before the tornadoes, it was floods that were also on the national news. And then before that, we had some blizzards. And that normally doesn't all happen to that level, but some of it does. And I think that has shown me like a fear of God, not in a, oh my goodness, I'm scared of him, but like a healthy way of like how incredible his creation is. We have Cumberland Falls, which I want to explain because not everybody knows what Cumberland Falls is, but after Niagara Falls, it's the second largest waterfall in America, and that includes like Mexico, all those places. So on this continent. And it is stunningly beautiful. It's like an hour from here. And these floods, when I see the videos where it shows how it goes from a waterfall to they call it Cumberland Steps,
Yeah.
it's like the most incredible thing that God created that. First off, that he created this falls with a rainbow that shows up in the middle of the night, which is a worldwide phenomenon. And to see that and then watch the floodwater and you just see how powerful God is, you just see it raging and this falls disappear. It's beautiful, but also insanely scary at the same time.
Uh, you can. You can feel him when you look at stuff like that. You see its beauty, like you said, but at the same time, you're thinking, like, how instantly that could just wash you away. That's the same as God. He's beautiful, but he could wash you away in a heartbeat.
It keeps things into perspective. You have the side where you talked about where it's every day you see the beauty, and then there's those moments with the flood, with the tornadoes. Today I was out in London and the tornado damage, and just seeing cars that looked like they were toy cars that a child was smashing together till they broke. Like I've never seen anything like that in my life, and just recognizing like God's creation did that. He obviously doesn't want or have evil plans for us, but like we're in a fallen world and these things happen, and you just see this natural phenomenon take regular sized cars and make them like toy cars.
Yeah.
It's absolutely incredible. Um, I do want to ask you, so I mentioned like you're a wife, you're a mom, you're a business owner, you just graduated with your associate's degree. So, in a lot of the rest of the world, like you talked about, we're very closed off here in Kentucky. This is a very closed community. It's very limited information, actually, and everyone's pretty set in the same exact opinion for the most part.
Yeah.
And we have a Baptist. Well, there might not be a stoplight, but this morning we were talking about it. I think there's like 15 Baptist churches at least in
Oh,
Waynesburg alone.
as a former youth pastor, mine said you could swing a dead cat and probably hit a church.
You really could.
Yeah. I don't know where he got that, but that's what he used to say.
It's very Kentucky sounding and also very true. And it's just like being here because of that limited information. I also think there's some healthier things too. Because we get into the large scale of things, and there's the whole feminist debate. And there's this idea of, I need to abort my baby because it's going to be in the way of my dreams. Or I need to have a career and I can't have kids because they're going to affect that. Or on the opposite end, we could swing over and say, all I'm going to do is have kids and everything else is going to be shut away. You don't fit either of those. And I do feel like that's something I see more commonly down here is young mothers that are married and that are also running businesses in school, different things like that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, it definitely wasn't my plan, which everything ultimately is God's plan. It all happened in a whirlwind. I'm really glad it's happened the way it has. But I don't want to be that person that's, I gotta pick one. I've never been the person that I have to pick mom, wife, or student, or business owner. And I've really just now picked up on that. I've always went against the grain. I've never been one to go with the flow. And it took me a while to get there because I used to be really shy up until high school. Like my own struggle with mental illness, I think was the biggest inspiration. When my granny died to lung cancer, that was the switch. Like my brain just shut down for 2 years. Then COVID hit, and then just one thing after the other. And then finally, when I got that help I needed, I said, I want to go to college. And I was looking into that. And then I got hit with a breakup. Me and my boyfriend of 3 years broke up. But then this, hey, God works in funny ways. Remember this. 2 weeks later, I got together with a man I would marry after about a year and a half of being together. And then we were engaged for about 3 months, and then we got married. And he helped me get into college. I said, I want to go to college. He said, okay, because he was in college and he'd been through that. And then I'm thinking, I don't want to keep the job that I'm at because I also want to raise my son. So I wanted to be a student, but I also wanted to be an involved parent.
Yeah.
I grew up with a mom that was home with me up until a certain age, and that was by the time I was in school. But right now, my son is 1, and I'm determined to be my own boss in the business sense. I know that could be taken in many ways, but just thinking about this business, I'm I don't want to go back to a a typical job.
Mhm.
I want to start something new. I want to be original, and that's how I always think about things. So here I am, mom, wife, student, and then business owner, which is still in its early phases and is very interesting because I have seen growth in that. So I kind of feel like now I can use that title somewhat loosely. There's almost really imposter syndrome in a lot of it too. Because it's like, how am I doing all this? And then somebody will boast on what I'm doing. And I'm like, no, I don't need to be boasted over. It's nice that you're recognizing me, but I just don't feel like it's my accomplishments because I want God to use it and show other girls that they can do the same.
And I will say that God has used it. So we go to church together as well. And we were at church on Mother's Day, and that was funny to watch because they're like, "Who's the youngest mom?" And you stood up. And then they're like, "Who's graduating school?" And you stood up. I feel like within that, I should throw in there that you are married to someone who wants to go into ministry, and you all have held positions in ministry. So you've also done that.
Yes. That's another interesting stressful factor to put onto the other titles that describe me.
I agree that can be very stressful being young in ministry, and it can be very hard because if you're in the wrong fit for that, it can feel like everyone expects a maturity that's not going to be there yet because you're young and you haven't experienced life. But at the same time, as we're talking just about the culture here in Kentucky, about all the family support we both have actually, and just the way your husband supported you. I think part of the reason you've had so many opportunities is the go with the flow pace of the mountains. That here there is the ability to try and fail. And at the end of the day, you tried, it didn't work, or you do it all. And there's not a lot of wrong ways to do things, for lack of a better way to put it. That there's a very accepting nature that I felt since being here, where it's like, okay, you're doing what? Now you're doing what? Now you're doing what? And nobody really cares. They're just like, that's cool. I'll help. And so I do think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen like overall there is a general willingness to let people live their lives and try different things.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I know there's a stubborn streak that runs through here as well, but for the most part, people are very interested in what you have to say and your life experiences because everybody in this area seems to have had their own experience. Because there are a lot of hardships also in this part of the world.
I agree, and I'm going to point that out because we're talking about Kentucky, and that's something I'm really passionate about. Is you see a lot of things, and I don't want to negate the things like you hear about the inner city, about the black community, and this victim mentality that comes along that says we have nothing. But I've told people before, like, my parents left this community and they upgraded when they went to the inner city and went into an all black community because there was more opportunity. It was when I was older that I learned that Mother Teresa actually visited right down the road from here, where my mom lived, and she went to see if she could help. Like, put that in perspective. Mother Teresa came to America and went to Eastern Kentucky. And it's because when you go to Eastern Kentucky, it's like we talked about. There's not Wi Fi, and it's the 21st century for a lot of people. The housing codes, there are housing codes, but like, how are you going to find the house that's half built? Because there's still a lot of woods. And like if you don't have a car, you can't get to work. It's impossible. And we talk a lot about eco-friendly, which I am all for eco-friendly, but they've talked a lot about shutting coal mines and stuff down. Coal mining is one of the main forms of payment back in the day, especially for Eastern Kentucky, and it's stripping away jobs when there were already limited, not to mention the health problems you get from the jobs.
Yeah.
So I've been learning a lot as I've been here this time is we're both blessed to have cars and family that's healthy, but there's a lot of things back here that this is one of the very poorest areas of the United States. And the reality that I think is kind of cool is I don't sense a lot of victim mentality. I sense a lot of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're gonna walk 5 miles to work mentality.
And that's also where that stubborn streak can show its face sometimes, but for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty special and incredible to see that because as believers, we really need to train ourselves, as you've been talking about going through your own mental health experience, overcoming that, and then just going, oh, I am going to do this, and I am going to do this, and I am going to do this, and then just trying and marrying someone who will support that, which is also important, and having family that's also cheerleading you. It's so important that we don't give in to the lies that we can't do something because nowhere in the Bible does it say I cannot do anything. That's the exact opposite where we've got I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And we need to reverse that across all races, across society, be a little more Appalachian in that sense and say, I can do it and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get that result. And I'm going to find people who I will also say this may be a good and a bad trait because I know I've been called out on both ways for it, who are willing to be blunt and honest and say, okay, that's crazy. And like you mentioned the judgmental side, but in some ways I appreciate that as well, of where I would rather you gossip to me to my face than behind my back.
Right.
And I can learn something.
Well, and we're taught also that God will not let us continue in a path of things that we're not supposed to be doing. And we were raised both by very biblically educated people. And so they are also going to remember that they need to be like that as well as our parents or grandparents. And they're not going to let us continue down this path of sin without saying something. That'd be bad on their part. And they love us.
And that's the message that you're saying that, and we're both blessed. And that is something I've seen here in the mountains is a higher value of family, of traditional family, of sticking together and believing in one another as a family, and a lot more people that are families that believe in Jesus in this area. And I've told people because they're like, oh, like you talked about people boasting on you. I'm similar to you. I don't need the attention or necessarily want it, despite having a podcast and all these things that were kind of handed to me. I'm much more introverted than that. But like I always point it back to at the end of the day, it was Jesus and family. And that's why I do the work I do, like with foster care, with the pro life movement, is because my degrees didn't do anything for me. They besides open doors to jobs I couldn't have without the requirement. But even if you talk to the people I was hired by, it's because of my family story. And I've learned to accept that and be grateful for it because there are people out there who do not have families. I'm going to ask you this question as well. But to the girl listening, don't give up on your family. And maybe they don't have the level of faith you feel like you do or something, but that is not a reason to abandon your family. And your family is there to support you and to challenge you and to hold you accountable. They're not just there to be like your buddy that hangs out and gives you stuff. They're there to really say, what can you do that is the next level of your life? And like, I'm blessed to have Kayla and her husband Tanner, who also love doing ministry too. So we can drag each other along to serve other people. And we've done quite a bit of that already. And that is a huge blessing. If you have that, be grateful for it. But if your family is still growing, let them grow. Let them hold you accountable, and maybe they're not perfect at it. Like for me, my parents were teenagers when they had me, so I joke and say I grew up with them a little bit. Like I have pictures of all of us up in a tree when I was a teenager. And I understand that most people's parents are not capable of that necessarily, but that's just, we had to learn together in a different way than most families. But that's not a bad thing, and that's going to give you the support so you can pursue your dreams. Like you were talking about your husband too. It's like who you align yourself with, who you marry matters, who you have alongside of you matters, and it should be family first. It doesn't need to be a bunch of people you're hanging out with. It should be family, should be where you go home. It's actually our grandpa that told me that the other day, was God made the family before he made the church.
Yeah.
Like when you go to church, like we go together as a family actually, and we serve others. We come already willing to serve because the foundation with Christ was actually laid in our homes.
You brought up a very good point, and it reminded me of part of our papa's testimony that he stood up and gave at church within the last few years. That when it had been my uncles, his sons, were growing up, and they lived a walk away from the church. Like you could see it from the porch steps. So they were very close. And Papa will tell you that he was laying in his bed one day praying that his boys, well, I mean his whole family, would grow up in church. And he said, as clear as day, he heard a voice say, "Get up and take him."
He
And
told me
so,
that story again this morning actually.
yeah. So he got up and he took him. And it's like, if you want your boys in church, you got to take them. God calls us to work to get some of the things that we ask him for. And I love hearing him say that.
I do too. I have heard that story like 5 times in the last
I'm
few.
sure you have.
But I really appreciate it and the honesty there to say, hey, I needed to make a change and make that happen. And he was willing to listen to God and did. For our final question, as we're down to the last bit here, I want to ask you, what would you say to the girl your age who is trying to figure out how to balance it all? Like she's already married, already has a kid, but she has dreams on her heart too. What would you say to her?
As somebody that was basically thrown into it, don't put yourself down. That is one of the easiest things to do. Put yourself down, and the hardest things to keep yourself from. And it's going to be stressful. And I'm not even through to the other side. I'm still not at the point I can say I've made it to the other side, but I can say that I'm making it to the other side because I have that support system that I need. When you have that support system, even my in-laws, I remember praying years ago before I even knew my husband that I would have a good relationship with my in-laws. And then years down the road, I get married and I move in with them. That was God's answer to that prayer, moving in with my in-laws. But it built that support system up too. And then I was able to heal relationships with my parents, partly because of my in-laws, but also, I mean, God was working that out right there. He found the right husband for me. And then you'll hear me talk about my dog. I mean, even the emotional support of a pet, of my son, just seeing that's why I do things. Having that support system around you is one of the biggest things you can do. And never talk yourself down. Make sure those people around you are lifting you up to counteract all that negative noise in your head.
And I would add to that, what would you say to that girl who doesn't have that support system? How would you encourage her to find that?
Well, as a follower of Christ, I would first lean on Jesus. And for those that don't know that relationship, I hope you do come to know that because that was the whole reason that I have the support system that I have today is because he made it. And that's so much harder without him. If you don't have those people around you, maybe you find a church or a healthy place that you're comfortable being at and just go there. Maybe regular and see who else is regular. See some familiar faces and eventually you'll build connections.
I agree, and I want to add on to that too, of like you said, in addition to a church, especially if you're not a Christian or you're a newer Christian,
Or you're out of church too.
exactly. Don't be afraid to go to a pregnancy center. They are all about supporting you, and they will show up at your front door if you ask.
Hmm.
So go to one, and there's tons of them all over the US, and they will gladly be your community, and they'll even plug you into a church.